turn off the screen as well.
Oh my God, you're illuminated.
I know. I'm positively glowing.
Yes, you look so healthy.
Hey everyone, welcome back to She Changed History. This is
Hello,
Simon.
I'm Vicky.
How you doing, Vicky?
I'm good. We're live podcasters now, so this we've launched.
This
We're
is our first recording since launch, isn't it?
Yeah, and I guess the most important thing to say is thank you. It's been a whirlwind of a week. I was so tired on Tuesday, despite I was like, I need to go to bed. Like all these the messages and the comments and the likes and everything. It's just been overwhelming. So yeah, it's
Yes,
really cool.
I've
Yeah,
had some lovely feedback. So yeah, thank you everyone. And remember to
big
share it
thank
with
you.
your friends, anyone you think would be interested, anyone you think won't be interested, because they probably will.
Yeah.
Um, and
And
yeah,
it's already building, because today is the first day where a subject has been recommended by a listener. So
ooh,
this was originally given to me by the wonderful Cara, who
excellent.
gave me a little article on it. And she was like, I don't know if this is up your street, but I really like this story. And then I looked into it, and it is an incredible story. So let's get to it, shall we?
Yeah, I mean, all I've really got is a picture of her, and
hmm
she's looking badass. A really strong, like sword fighting pose.
So this is the story of Ellen Hatton, who has a nickname, aka Jaguarina.
And she sounds like a gladiator.
Well, you're not far off. Shimmering armor poised a sword, a fierce grin behind the mask. Ellen Hatton, the 19th century Queen of Swords, gallops horseback towards her opponent. A public challenge issued, a reward offered, a champion's pride at stake. With each swift strike, she cuts another name from her list, a testament to her skill and audacity. Trained by a visionary master who saw beyond the societal norms, Hatton redefines the boundaries of women's roles. She's not only a duelist, she's a spectacle, a legend, the Amazon of the American racetracks. This is the story of Ella Hatton, better known as Jaguarina.
Badass.
You excited?
I am, yeah.
Great. Sources today are a Martial Arts New York article, various Wikipedia, a episode of Claire Mead's podcast called La Jaguarina, and North Atlantic Books with some others that I'll pop in our show notes. So we start in Ohio. So Ellen Hatton was born January 1859. She's the 10th child of a Spanish
Ooh.
mother called Maria Hinman and Anglo father called William Hatton, who was a tailor. In 1860, the family lived in Meigs Township, Ohio. When Ellen was 3 or 4, her father died in the Civil War, so she didn't have much time with her father. Do you know much about the American Civil War?
No.
Me neither. So I did some research. I was like, I can't be on a podcast talking about the Civil War and not really understand it. American listeners will be like, we teach this in school, but some of us, we don't know it. So
Yeah, we don't get it over here, do
we don't get, we barely get our own history, let alone anyone else's. So the Civil War in America is basically between the North and the South. It was 1861 to 1865, and essentially it was about slavery. The South wanted to break away from the Union, so United States, to permit and to expand into the West, lead into more slave states. So they were slave heavy and they wanted to move west. Northern states were opposed to slavery. They wanted slavery to be permitted, which many believed would place slavery on the ultimate course of extinction, which makes sense. Ohio, which is where Ellen's father was, that was a northern state, so they were opposed slavery. So after decades of controversy, it was all brought to a head by Abraham Lincoln, who was opposed slavery. He won the 1860 presidential election. This then upset the southern states who wanted to break away, and they essentially started withdrawing from the United States, forming a confederacy. And that's when the war happened. It was a real catalyst point. And that leads to the war in which obviously Ella's family and many others were affected. So that's a little rundown. That is like Sparks Notes Central rundown of
Key
the Civil
details.
War. Yeah. In 74, her mother moved with Ella and one of her brothers, Perry, to Cleveland, which is still in Ohio. As Ella grows up, she joins a theatre company. So this is in 1880. She began performing at a small dramatic school in Cleveland called John Elsa's Stock Company, which eventually made its way to New York. So this guy, he started off in Cleveland and he travelled along.
Hmm.
This wasn't his first theatre company, but he was like old hat at this. Like this was like his life's work. And he managed to
Okay.
turn this one into the Academy of Music, which eventually became one of the most prestigious theatres and acting schools in America. So he knew what he was
Wow.
doing,
Yeah.
basically. And I imagine, I don't know how true this is, but the way I read it was this was just like Ella's after school club. And then it just
Okay.
escalated and became more and more. And because it was so prestigious, that kind of put her on the path to success with it all.
I'm looking forward to seeing how it escalates from after school theatre club to riding a horse with a sword.
Well, it's a really interesting connection, I think, because we'll see later, it's not just Ella, there's other people it affects as well. So, Ella is part of this company. We're not sure what she performed. We know some of the plays that this company put on. One of them was called Saratoga, which is it's a satirical play, but Ella isn't on those play sheets. Either way, we know that she ends up in New York City in its, you know, excitement, think greatest showman, I'm kind of
Hmm.
thinking at this point. So when she's here, this is when there's a huge pivotal moment when Ella, at the age of 18, becomes a pupil of Monstry, New York School of Arms. So there's a little bit of dispute here whether this actually happened in New York City or Chicago. But the teacher who I'm about to introduce you to, he was living in New York City at the time. So it kind of makes sense that it was New York
Yeah.
City. His name is Colonel Thomas Monstery. He runs this school of arms, and upon speaking of meeting Ella, he declared he would make this little girl the greatest woman fencer of her time. So immediately, straight
Wow.
off the bat, saw some talent in her. Yeah.
I'd love to know what it is that you picked out. What was her characteristic that
Hmm.
made him think, wow.
This is the one. Well, Hatton, so Ella, sorry, she actually had become training in fencing at the age of 8. She had originally learned fencing with the foil and a knife from her mother,
Hmm.
so her Spanish mother at the start. So we think maybe that's where it comes from.
Okay.
But there's lots
So
of
she already
smoke
had
and
the
mirrors.
sort of the stance, maybe. She had that,
Yeah,
like
I
you can
think,
tell if someone's a ballerina just from
right?
their
That's
posture
exactly
and
what
whether
I was
there's
just
like a
thinking.
dancer's stance. Maybe there's a fencer's stance. I did a year of fencing in primary school.
Did you enjoy it?
Nice. Uh, yeah, I did. It's tremendously difficult.
Is
Yeah,
it?
yeah,
Even with
far
all
more
like the
difficult.
lightweight clad and stuff.
Oh yeah, yeah, and you're
Because
wearing like a lot of protection, and you just need to move so swiftly and delicately. And swift and delicate are two things I've never been described as. Um,
me
that
neither,
wasn't
to
for
be
me.
honest. What have I been described as? We shouldn't open that door. I don't think. Not today. Um, so let's talk a little bit about Colonel Thomas Monstery because it's his school and it was such an important part of Ella's life. This description makes me think it reminds me a bit of the Dad in Umbrella Academy. I don't know if you've seen Umbrella
Ooh, not
Academy.
watched that. No.
There's a patriarch in it who is like mustache, monocle, eccentric. It turns out he's a baddie. I don't think this guy's a baddie, but it had that kind of vibe in it. So
That's just how I picture
yeah,
anyone, any colonel.
yeah, exactly.
Little twiddly mustache and
Yeah, if you're a kennel, you
monocle.
must have
Yeah,
a moustache.
yeah.
So Thomas Monstry has fought in numerous wars and revolutions, had survived, participating in more than 50 duels with the sword, the knife, and the pistol.
When you say duel, are we talking an actual duel, like he slaps him with the glove and
I've written here in parentheses Hamilton because it's kind of that kind of era. The pistols are
Mhm.
very much, they're still deadly, don't get me wrong, but they're
Mm.
not the guns of pistols we have today.
Okay.
Um, but it's still very, very deadly. He has 22 scars all over his body to prove that he's been in these duels. He is also a teacher as well. So he's got a vast amount of experience. I've got a list of weapons that he trained in and trained others in, and in
Okay.
particular Ella. One is called a rapier. which is a straight, single-handed sword with a long, slender blade that's pointed, and that originated in Spain and Italy. A dagger, which we all know what a dagger is, like Macbeth. A broadsword, which is a large, heavy sword with a broad blade used for cutting rather than thrusting.
My only knowledge of swords is from Dungeons and Dragons, and like
I
rapier
think
is single-handed and more stabby, whereas you have broadsword
yes.
two-handed and heavy, and you just absolutely clobber them with it.
Yeah, okay, maybe that's where we should be thinking. A Bowie knife, which is a sheath-like fighting knife. A lance, which is long and thin and more spear shape. And then I've put in brackets Red Dead Redemption 2.
You can tell where nothing about the Civil War, our cultural references. So
They're
Red
very
Dead and
different.
D&D, yeah.
The bayonet, which is a weapon that can be attached to the end of a rifle or a musket, and it's like a spear-like weapon, which I've seen a few of those, like in war films and stuff. A quarter staff, which is a wooden shaft that is usually 6 to 9 feet long and have a metal tip spike at one or both ends. So that sounds absolutely terrifying. No, thank you. Colonel Monstery was also a professor of sparring, and he even developed a special system of bare knuckle defense. So that's kind of,
Wow.
you know, it is what it sounds like: punching, grappling, kicking.
He could look after himself, though.
He's a scrappy little man, yes.
Yeah.
The big difference with Colonel Thomas and anybody else in that era is that Thomas encouraged women to take up fencing with a variety of weapons. He encouraged them to take up boxing long before it was popular and fashionable to do so. He was really a propeller of this.
That's cool because so many of these stories that we come across, I'm thinking back to the Olympics, like the Women's Olympics, there seems to be this idea that women can't run, women can't fight. It's very unbecoming for them to do any of these physical activities. So particularly
Yeah,
for like the boxing aspect, for him to be promoting that. I wonder what made him think that way, what made him so different to
I love
other
that.
people of the time.
And it's such a similar time frame. So if you think of
Yeah,
Aaron Pierre from Alice Millier's story, so go back and listen to that if you're interested in a different
episode 5.
stance. Oh, well done. Love that you know that. Marvelous. It's just completely different, isn't it? But I don't think he was popular at the time. Like, this is like a small selection of women he's got. And it
Okay.
tended to be famous people and actresses. And that was because it was seen as acceptable for actresses because it was a little bit like choreography. So it's perfectly
Okay.
acceptable for a woman to dance on stage. But if you just change those movements slightly and put a blade in her hand,
Yeah.
she's a menace, right?
Mhm.
So it was seen as okay for actors to do that, which I thought was really interesting. In Europe, there was a slightly different school that was doing something very similar. So in Vienna, the Johann Hartel's women fencing class aimed to train dancers and actresses in proper uses of weapons, of props in fight scenes, basically.
I get a lot of videos come up on my YouTube feed, but one that's
Yeah,
come up recently is stunt woman versus gymnast.
you're
And
on the
it's
right lines. Yeah.
okay. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what it sounds like because it's sort of highly choreographed, but a lot of the same skills, a lot of the strengths, muscle
Massive.
groups, movements. Mm.
Yeah. But you can see as soon as it was one of those things where I hadn't thought about it, but as soon as I read it, I was like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. And they're really popular as well. This Viennese fencing women's group actually ended up touring across Europe and America doing these type of
Wow.
demonstrations. Yeah. There's a New York City advertisement of Colonel's classes that offered private instructions to ladies and misses. And speaking of it, and speaking of why he wants to teach women, he says it is a great mistake to suppose that women cannot learn fencing as quickly as men. The fact is, women are much quicker pupils. They are much more flexible of body. Their limbs are more supple and elastic. That's one advantage. Their mental brightness enables them to pick up the strategy of art quicker. That's the second advantage. And the third, they have more nerve. It's a fact. I don't know why, but it's a fact. Isn't that amazing? What a cool contrast between what we're normally talking about men on this podcast.
I
It's
love it, and I
nice.
love the emphasis on the strategy as well. I mean, with the fighting, there's lots of different styles of fighting, obviously, and you might think of boxing with heavyweights; they tend to be the bigger brawlers. But yeah, smaller. Like you look at any MMA these days or sort of Eastern martial arts, and it's that speed and suppleness and movement. You don't, and think back to Bruce Lee even, you need to be quick, real quick.
Again, a list of things I don't have.
And
Very, very different realm.
I wonder if
Um,
there's a noticeable difference in ego as well. Because like I just think about the sort of men squaring up to each other outside of a pub, and they're not going to step down, not because they've got a good plan, but because they can't be seen to lose or to be weak.
it's ego,
Um,
right? I think maybe that transfers across to Ella, but we'll come on to that in a little bit. So Colonel's teaching two classes of lady boxers in New York City as well at the time. Sometimes he just uses a stick. He just teaches how people to defend with a stick, which is so being a woman and being in the UK at this time where our crime rates of women is high, and even establishments that are meant to protect us do not. I'm specifically thinking of cases like Sarah Everard. You
yeah.
know, it's crazy that he was on it. He was on it then.
Mm.
One of his most famous things was a parasol drill. So he wrote a book because, of course, he wrote a book. Everybody writes a book about their thing. In Thomas's book, he explains that a great self-defense weapon is an umbrella. He describes it as a fearful weapon if used with both hands like a bayonet. It will parry the blows of a big bully, and you can return him a stab in the face or breast or stomach, and that will settle him.
Settle him. It'll calm him right down. Calm down. Yeah.
And then in my notes, I've put, yes, bring this back, please. That's what I've written after that. And then I've got a lovely image of a lady. So here's a lady in traditional high society
Oh,
dress
amazing.
with an
Yeah.
umbrella as a bayonet. So, you know, that's what was in the book. And he called that the parasol drill. So that's what he did.
Loving it. I hadn't thought about the dress because the dress back then for women was so restrictive, wasn't it, in terms of movement? They were really sort of trussed up with corsets and things in
You're
the
right.
higher
Monash
society. How can they fight in that?
Not very well. So
Oh,
Monstry
okay.
also insisted that his female students ditch the corsets for loose enough to allow free play and every
Mhm.
muscle to allow to move. He was right because corsets were later linked to health problems. And I've put he would have loved today's fashion. So, little note.
He'd have been all
Um,
over Gymshark.
yeah. Also, I'm reading this amazing book called Invisible Women at the minute. Basically, it's a book about how women are erased from society and how societies are created. And there's a whole chapter in there on PPE and military wear. And now, finally, studies are starting to happen. I think the first study happened in 2017. So that's how late this has been studied. But then basically, PPE and military wear are not safe for women. They
Mhm.
have higher injury tolls and they're just completely the wrong proportions because the default for safety wear is often one size, and that size has been based on a man.
Portions are all male, aren't they? I think the most
Yeah,
before then that they've ever done for like female-centric PPE is just make it pink instead of fluorescent green.
it's so frustrating. And the fact that it was actually causing deaths in some cases, that
Yeah.
the PP wasn't suitable, it was causing like grinding away of the bone because the
Oh God.
proportions were all weird. It's a fascinating book. It's by Carolina Criado Perez, and I would recommend everybody read it. And this is just one chapter, there's so much in it. But
Mhm.
it just also shows how ahead of his time Monstry was. The fact that this book was released in 2018 just shows nothing's moved on, basically. So perhaps due to this progressive attitude, Thomas was able to attract a remarkable number of high profile female students, actresses in particular, including Ella. So Ella went to this school, she became a prodigy under Thomas. Hatton would go on to be recognised as one of the great swordswomen of the 19th century and perhaps of all time. So she was with him for about 3 years, but it was a grueling 3 years. It was full on commitment. Ella speaks of her time there as I fenced 3 hours a day with foil and sabre for 3 years before I was really considered qualified enough as a fencer. The road to success as a fencer is paved by aching muscles and bruises from cuts of a sword. She learns to do all the things I mentioned above, so that big list of weapons Thomas, knowing how good she is, throws everything at her. He is a really harsh teacher. And then he upgrades her and says, now you've learned to do it all, learn it to do it all on horseback. That was the next level, basically.
My mum was the same when she taught me how to cook.
Just go again. Now do it on a horse.
Yeah. Think you can poach an egg?
She says, I was put on a horse and kept on that horse, astride like a man, from 7 o'clock in the morning to noon every day. During that time, I worked with my trainer, fencing mounted. At 12 o'clock, I was taken off my horse, stiff and sore, and almost carried to my house. Then came the agony of taking off my riding clothes. So, she works hard. She's putting in the time, she's putting in the
Really hard.
effort. Hmm.
Is she training for something in particular or just to be amazing?
Sport was quite lucrative, obviously, back in the day. So,
Okay.
you can get rewards and stuff. And I think it was a passion for it as well.
So she was
Um,
training to compete.
but it's really interesting because, like you said before, and this is maybe why I compare this Thomas guy to Hargreaves in Umbrella Academy, because he never lets on how good Ella is. Positive reinforcement just doesn't seem to be his thing. She went through this tremendous amount of pain, grueling training, blood sores, bones breaking, bandages, the whole shebang. But she only ever finds out for herself how good she is when one day she's confronted by just a sexist prick, really, in the street. He starts having a go at her, I think, because of how she looks, because
Mhm.
she's clearly muscly, she's strong, she doesn't look in the traditional sense of high profile
Yeah.
women at that time. So she's confronted by this guy literally harassing her in the street. Again, not different from 2024. Because she's high profile and she's known in the local papers and stuff, there was an article written about it, and it says, as soon as she comprehended what his words meant, as in the harasser, bang, biff, she landed right and left and he fell to the ground. Get up, you coward, she commanded. A hand he overcame by wringing toes, very foolishly crawled to his knees. Biff, bang, right and left landed again, and down he went. And this time he refused to get up, sprawled on the ground, calling for help. She was amazed at how easy that was for her.
Sounds easy and instinctive. And I've forgotten as well how much I love the word biff.
It's of its time, isn't it? You can tell that's a
Very of
quote
its time.
for
It's like
sure.
an old Batman.
It goes on to explain how she punched this dude without damaging herself. So we know she's talented. We know she's a hard worker. So what happens next for Ella, basically? The answers is duels. So that's her goal. She wants
Okay.
to fight. She wants to travel the world, and she wants to become a performer. And she does that. And not only does she do that, she becomes an absolute sensation. On a Sunday in England, we tend to have the football. That's quite a big thing of our
Mhm.
culture. And that's where certain people go on a Sunday afternoon. But back in the late 1880s, watch a series of duels. This had been part of life in America for decades and a completely normal thing to do. 7,000 people at one event was a number I read when researching this. This was like
Wow.
big matches, big cultural, huge part of society. In these duels, atmosphere was absolutely electric. They're there to put on a show. Claire Mead describes it as they channeled the glitz and the glamour of the medieval jousting tournaments, or the way 19th century people imagined medieval tournaments to be. But that was coupled with the excitement of the atmosphere of a boxing match. Ella wants to be part of this, and this is the next part of her story. So she starts fighting. Some people decline to fight her because, she's a woman. Her first ever fight was set to be with a sword champion called Duncan C. Ross, but he refused. We don't know why, but obviously we can speculate those reasons. Maybe he was scared, maybe he didn't want to hit a woman, maybe he just wasn't progressive enough for it. But she didn't waste her time moving on, finding new opponents who would accept her challenge. And she won, and then she won again, and then she won again. It's quite extraordinary hearing some of the descriptions. For example, when she was fighting, heavy blades cut through the air like flashes of lightning. Steel rang on steel in a series of movements so rapid in execution as to defy being followed by the eye. Like
Wow.
she was quick, man. She
Yeah.
was she was really good at what she did. She defeated heavyweights, such as someone called Sergeant Owen Davis of the US Cavalry, a famed knife duelist, a duelist called Charles Engelbrook of the Danish Royal Guard, and the fencing master E.N. Jennings of the Royal Irish Hussars. So she was really in the gambit. She was in front and centre in this dueling world. She's at the top of her game. She's smashing through these people, making light work of them. The wins get noticed, and this is when her sport becomes monetized. She ends up having agents and wages and people to organize her. Like it becomes a bit of an operation, not unlike today, I would say. In between her matches, she resides in California. This is just another little quirk that I loved is that it wasn't unknown for her to say no to the railway or to cars or to anything like that to get around. She preferred to ride her horse there. So she like
So cool.
sails in like the Wild West.
Yeah, love that.
Yeah. Her horse's name was Muchacho, and he was very resilient and accompanied his mistress in these fights on horseback as well. So she used traveling on horseback as a way to build up his resilience in long trips, make sure he's in
Well,
fighting condition too.
shout out to the horse. Oh, it sounds like she was really popular and sort of continued to be surprised because I just assumed at that time that the idea of women fighting would just be abhorrent to most sports fans back then.
Well, don't
Um,
forget she's a performer as well. Like
yeah, okay.
she knows how to work a crowd. So
Yeah.
before Jules, she had been known to lap arenas with like her hair flowing, her shirt bellowing,
She
and then
sounds amazing.
yeah, and instead of because traditionally you'd get dressed in your armor and you would enter, but she used to do this lap and she used to
Hmm.
purposefully get dressed and put her armor in front of the crowd. So she really knew how to work a crowd.
She really had
Um,
the theatrics there.
and she knew how to get the most out of her outfit as well. Words to describe it as shining, glistening, scratches of previous people who had been defeated. She'd been known to wear Jaguar print because that was her namesake,
Oh, sweet.
Jaguarina.
Yeah.
She knew what she was doing. She was a very
Hmm.
clever sausage.
Did the press of the time embrace her, or did she get a lot of backlash from them?
They did. They seemed to really take her on board. One, for example, New York Sunday Telegraph describes her as a fear-faced Amazon. So that's not derogatory in any
Yeah.
way. They let her like bask in this glory, mainly because she's really good. So, for example, in one of the fights, she had 11 grueling rounds of 3 minutes each with 1 minute rest in between. And you're just being beaten during this time.
Flipping heck.
Yeah, and she was beating so many legendary people. So, for example, there was the largest champion of the time was a German swords master called Wiedemann. She beat him. I think they took it on meritocracy, really, the press. They're like, you're doing well, let's get behind you.
It's lovely that finally one of these stories we have, the person's actually been embraced at the time rather than just appreciating them 100 years later.
For sure.
Mm.
It's really fascinating, isn't it? I don't know if it was because of her training or because she had
Yeah.
someone believing in her from such a young age. I think self-belief is somewhat a learned behavior. If
Hmm.
you've got someone pushing you down and saying you're not good enough all the time, you have a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy about it. But maybe she was just oblivious to it. Maybe she was like,
Hmm.
my one job is to beat these people. I'm going to beat them. And
Yeah.
that's what she did.
I love that
Um,
belligerence.
she also knows how to celebrate as well. So she always basks in her glory at the end, because obviously there's arenas with thousands of people in. At the end, there's always like a after party. She's known to sing and perform at these parties that happen after. She's known to get drunk together with people that come along. For example, there's one match where she beat this Wiedemann, so this king of kings of swordsmen, and actually the Viennese women's group that I spoke at the top of the show that in Vienna they were really good. They had travelled to the match to egg her on and cheer her, and they all
Oh,
went out
wicked.
after.
Oh, that's sweet.
Yeah. So over time, the matches take their toll on her. There are injuries. Hatton has scars on her face, arms, and bodies, but she is also known for grace and refinement as well. One reporter in the Cleveland Plain Dealers describes her as perfect, self controlled, and sweet. There was a really cute little bit in the research where, after a bit of back and forth, her and Thomas have a match, her and Colonel Thomas. So they have like this
Okay.
reunited thing. They had this duel and she didn't win, but they drew. Like
That
the
feels like a
student had
fitting
become.
outcome, really.
I really liked it, you know. I was
Yeah.
like, it wasn't like the classic students become the master, it was holding your
Hmm.
own. That was done in public as well.
Hmm.
There was at one point where she'd beaten everybody going. She's now full in La Jaguarina mode. She's beaten every swordsman she could multiple times, mounted, on foot, everything. Like she's basically ran out of opponents. She even takes out newspaper ads offering a $5,000 reward. And this is like back in the 1800s, so that would be a lot more today to anyone that could defeat her. Nobody took her up on the offer.
That's a sensible choice. Yeah.
No one was going to do this. Um, So, over the course of her career, Ella has 60 wins in total. I've put for context here that Muhammad Ali actually won 56 times. So, that just kind of puts on where we're at in the scale of
Yeah.
things. 27 of these 60 matches were said to have been with Master of Arms. So, that is a
Wow.
statistic that's verified by at least one newspaper they found. Boston Daily Globe say that she has never been defeated in battle by general points. So, what do you do when you've beaten every man possible on horseback, everything else? And just imagine now she's got an agent. So, you can imagine an agent being sat there being like, well, what are we going to do with you now? The
Hmm.
agent says, how about you go and fight bulls? Because we've run out of men. So,
Oh, it's
get.
the obvious pivot. Yeah.
So, she
Bulls
was like,
renowned for their swordsmanship.
so that was the next deal, was like putting on this massive bullfighting event. She gets in there. She doesn't kill the bull. That's really important, but she makes child's play of it. She runs it round and round in circles. She dodges it. The crowd are absolutely terrified because there's this massive hundreds of pounds bull coming right at you.
Yeah.
And she makes it look like child's play is one of the descriptions.
Was the bull
Um,
also on horseback? Or...
there's like meta levels we could go for, isn't there? There's just so many we could do. And she leaps out of the arena when she's done. She kind of like dusts her hands off. That's that. Bish, bash, bosh.
What an
Makes it look like
absolute
child's
showwoman.
play. This is where she comes at a bit of a crossroads. Like she's not sure what else to do, right? She's kind of dominated every part of the field. I imagine like Serena Williams feels. She's got absolutely everything impossible. So, like any celebrity would, she branches out into different things. If you think about it today, she would definitely have a cookbook today. She would definitely be one of those people who'd be like, now's my time to release my cookbook. So she does a little bit of modeling, some performing because she is a trained actor. She played the comedic kind of foil in a number of plays. She sang.
Yeah.
At one point, she also marries. It does end in divorce a few years later, and there's not really any mention of any of the relationships. She does have a very close female associate,
Mhm.
but it's also really important to say that she's very good at drip feeding media. So if you
Mhm.
think, I don't know if you're watching the absolute spectacle that is the Wicked press tour at the minute.
No.
Like those girls are working hard on that press tour, my God. But you can tell all that media training's there. And she was doing the same thing. So she leaves breadcrumbs in the press of different stories, and it's really hard to ascertain what's true and what's not.
Mhm.
Like, for example, you know, at the start I said her mum taught her. That's one of the things she says happened in her childhood. And there's some stuff that's conflicting around it, but it's very interesting.
I love that, and you find this with a lot of our stories. They have skills in many sort of complementary areas, complementary but seemingly totally unrelated. So yeah, she's an incredible athlete and swordsmith, but also somehow seems to have this amazing brain for PR and showmanship and things that if you
Yeah.
just had one and not the other, she wouldn't have been this success.
It's a quality, isn't
She
it?
managed
It's
to bring them
like
together.
it's not being put in a box.
Yeah.
Don't put me in that box. I'm more than what you think I am. And I
Yeah.
love that. I think that's so cool. But even in retirement, that doesn't mean she stopped fighting. So
Hmm.
there's one account in the Washington, D.C. Evening Star that describes that a drunk was catcalling her and got in her way. and she had him by the collar and was shaking him with all the enthusiasm of a terrier over a newly captured rat. His hat went one way and his cane went the other, and his teeth played a castanet legato
Wow.
to the solo of good advice that was rapidly breathed into his vibrating ears. They don't write stories like that in
What a bit of
the
writing
paper
that is.
today. It's beautiful writing. When asked why she let him go, like why she let the cat caller go, she was like, "Well, I didn't really want to be prosecuted for manslaughter." That was the
Yeah,
only reason she
it's
stopped.
like a cat toying with a mouse, isn't it? It's not a fair fight.
And this is in her retirement. So, one of the things she does in retirement, which is really important to know, is that she opens a finishing school where she
Okay.
also taught women how to fence. So, she drops that ladders down, ready for the next generation.
Hmm.
So, she came from the student to the master to the teacher. The school was raved about in the newspapers at the time. It's where she kept all her trophies and her memorabilia of her absolutely fantastical career. Can you imagine what that hallway would look like? It kind of
Um,
filled me with really
Gleaming.
joy. Yeah, loads of joy,
I hope
that
there was a
image.
big sort of glass display case with her shining armor in there.
And it would all be like Victorian styly, like it would be like that circus top red colour that you see, and like the
Yeah.
beiges and the brown writing. You can imagine it, can't you? It'd be absolutely
Yeah.
beautiful. And she did. She taught women defence further on, and just imagine how inspiring she would be as a
Hmm.
teacher. That's pretty exciting. So, in summary, Ellen Hatton, aka the Jaguarina, was a pioneering swordswoman of the 19th century who shattered gender norms and dominated the male dominated sport of fencing. Under the guidance of her progressive Colonel Monstery, she became an undefeated duelist, a celebrated performer, and a mentor to future generations of female athletes. Her life story is one of resilience, skill, and showmanship, making her a legendary figure in the history of combat sports.
I want to go and watch her. I wish she was around these days. She sounds amazing. She kicked
Yeah,
ass,
she
start to
kicked
finish.
ass
Yeah.
through and through. Yeah, I didn't really mention it. Maybe we can dub it in later, but she got the name Jaguarina from the press and really leaned into that. Like it was a
Hmm.
compliment.
Not much to add about her. Just that that's absolutely freaking awesome.
I don't know if we have an equivalent, and I don't know if that's because I'm not sporty, so I don't know who who is good at fencing today in the female sports space. I don't know.
I mean,
Or if that's because we don't. I don't know.
yeah, certainly fencing isn't as popular as maybe it once was. You only really see it in the Olympics these days, generally, don't you? I'm thinking of fighters in UFC, in particular female boxers.
So you know the big and Mike Tyson fight at the
The
weekend,
best bit
the
about that was the pre-fight fight.
and that was women, right?
And the
So
undercard was women, and they were
yeah.
incredible. Taylor Serrano, and that was by
Hmm.
far the best thing. Like it was legitimate sport and an incredible match to watch.
Hmm. So you can say kind of what you want about Hogan, but he's very good at equality in sports. Like he's very good at spreading the female athlete word around. And
Mm.
that was part of his deal with Netflix, is that I want women on there. Maybe similar to what Ella's realm would have been at the time. Because they did bare knuckle fighting.
In no circumstance am I saying that I like him.
No, but we're
This is
saying that
the one redeeming thing that he's ever done for me.
yes, this is what we're saying. We're saying it's
Yeah.
really he did a really good thing on Friday night, Saturday morning, where he got women into the biggest boxing fight that has ever been. And he got women on that stage. So, we can't be too mad
That
at
is
him.
cool. Credit
Yeah,
where
we
it's
can't.
due. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think it was
And
60 million viewers, wasn't it?
it's insane. And yeah, good for him. So,
Mm,
yes, maybe Ella could have been like that if she was around today.
definitely. Yeah.
For sure. For
Oh,
sure.
fabulous.
Thank
Um,
you.
Thank you, Vicky. It was nice to
Thanks for
have
listening.
sort of uplifting badassery.
Woohoo.
Um, yeah. Yeah. Thanks everyone for listening. Remember to like, comment, subscribe.
If anybody's got any other stories like this was submitted to us, whack it to us in the Gmail account, like she changed history at Gmail.
Yeah.
You know,
Also
we're
put it on our
we're
Facebook page.
yeah, we're here to learn. So definitely give us some more.
Brilliant. Okay. Thanks, folks. See you next time.
Thank you. Bye.